New cases. There is a spike in positive tests for the coronavirus in some parts of the U.S. How the White House is responding. Cracking down. Hundreds of protesters are arrested in Hong Kong as a newly passed law from China takes effect. Death in the family. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI mourns the loss of his brother. And financial reform. Cardinal George Pell is part of an initiative to help better manage and use church finances. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 1st, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. An experimental COVID-19 vaccine is showing encouraging results. Drug makers say they already tested the vaccine on 45 people and plan to open a large-scale study this summer. The news comes in the midst of a spike in cases across several states. Vice President Mike Pence departs for Arizona, one of the states suffering from an increase in coronavirus cases. His message, the federal government is ready to help, but individuals also need to take precautions.
Wash your hands, practice good hygiene, and wear a mask.
It is a message echoed by Surgeon General Jerome Adams.
When you do not wear your face covering, we end up in a situation where you see higher rates of disease spread, and you end up having to close places.
Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, says it is no surprise we are seeing the virus spread among young people.
The younger people are going to the bars. Do you blame them? If you open up the bars, they're going to go to the bars. So now they're going to close down the bars. Okay, but these governors should say, do I want to open the bars now or the schools in 6 or 7 weeks? I vote for the schools in 6 and 7 weeks.
The number of coronavirus cases in America doubles every month, according to Johns Hopkins University. At least 19 states have decided to halt or roll back reopening plans just ahead of the 4th of July holiday weekend. Some of Florida's beaches will be closed after a surge on Tuesday that saw more than 6,000 new cases.
We're trying everything we can to stop this spread and reverse what is a very enormous spike in our community and in our state.
President Donald Trump is responding to the unverified leaks to the New York Times about alleged Russia bounty payments as fake news. The Times reported Friday that Russia was paying the Taliban to kill American soldiers and that President Trump did nothing after getting briefed. Today, the president tweeted that it was all made up to, quote, damage me and the Republican Party. He goes on to say the secret source probably does not even exist, just like the story itself. His national security advisor says the president was never briefed because the information was not verified and intelligence agencies could not agree that it was legitimate. Late last night, Senate Democrats won unanimous approval for an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, a popular subsidy for small businesses affected by COVID-19. It extended the program just mere hours before a deadline to apply was set to take effect. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosellis reports.
Small businesses have until August 8th to apply for coronavirus aid under the PPP. Democrats led the push in the Republican-led Senate. It was a move that they tried again this morning on a different bill, but were unsuccessful.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 112 H.R. 6, the American Dream and Promise Act.
Standing in front of a photograph of Dreamer Cynthia Ramirez, Senator Dick Durbin pushed for the Senate to pass House Bill H.R. 6. It would provide path to permanent legal status for immigrants brought to this country illegally as children.
I object.
With an objection from Republican Ted Cruz, the Dreamers bill did not pass, and then Senator Cruz put forth Kate's Law. It would impose mandatory minimum prison terms for people in this country illegally who have a history of certain serious crimes.
The reason Kate's Law is not the law is because every time I've tried to bring it up, the Democrats have objected.
And they objected again.
I object.
Today, Leader Schumer criticized Republicans while praising his party's successful passage of the PPP extension.
It's certainly something to celebrate, but I would have hoped that our two parties could have worked this out before last night as a small part of much broader legislation to address the many challenges posed by COVID-19.
Many small businesses like Atrevida Craft Beer Company in Colorado are still depending on PPP funds. And businesses have more time to benefit from the $134 billion still left in the program.
Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says that his party will continue to focus on COVID-related issues. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says that it will likely be after the July 4th recess when they focus on more COVID aid. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
House Democrats spoke today against racial discrimination and in support of police reform.
As we start looking at the pattern and practice of not only police departments for racial discrimination and unconstitutional behavior, that we take the pattern and practice approach and look at every aspect of the criminal justice system.
Congressman Benny Thompson criticized his state of Mississippi for displaying a statue of Jefferson Davis in the U.S. Capitol. Davis was president of the Confederate States during the Civil War. Thompson co-sponsors a bill to move the statue of Davis and other controversial figures to the Smithsonian Museum as part of history. A judge in Iowa is putting a stop to the latest pro-life measure in Iowa, the 24-hour waiting period. It was supposed to go into effect today after being signed by Governor Kim Reynolds on Monday. However, Planned Parenthood in Iowa challenged the law, claiming it violates the due process of pregnant women. The Missouri Supreme Court rules that the state was wrong to pull government funding for Planned Parenthood, America's largest abortion provider, and now has to start paying Planned Parenthood once again. Lawmakers in Missouri passed a provision in the state budget law last year that stopped Medicaid payments to any Planned Parenthood clinic. The organization sued, saying not all clinics perform abortions. And in a 6-1 ruling, the Missouri Supreme Court agreed. The U.S. Federal Communications Commission is declaring the Chinese telecom companies Huawei and ZTE as, quote, national security threats and is banning American companies that get government subsidies from using the money to buy equipment from the Chinese companies. The FCC says they are cooperating with China's spy agencies. Russia's president cast his ballot on the last day of voting on the country's constitutional amendments. Vladimir Putin showed his passport at a local polling station in Moscow on the final day of the week-long vote. Among other measures, the constitutional changes would allow Putin to serve 2 more 6-year terms. It would also outlaw gay marriage and mention a belief in God, but not a lot of turnout, as the vote is basically a rubber stamp after Russia's parliament already approved the amendments. The older brother of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI has died. Msgr. Georg Ratzinger passed away today in Germany. His brother traveled there from Italy last week to be by his side. Msgr. Ratzinger earned renown as the director of an acclaimed German boys' choir. He was 96 years old. Cardinal George Pell, the Vatican's former finance minister, helped to launch an initiative last night aimed at financial reform within the church.
It's one thing to have a spiritual vision which comes from Christ. It's another thing to have a plan or a project. And of course, to implement those things, you need managerial skills.
Cardinal Pell was making one of his first appearances since being acquitted of child sexual abuses in his native Australia. He was taking part in the launch of the Global Institute of Church Management. Joining us now is Father Luis Navarro. He is the rector of the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, which will oversee this new initiative. Father, welcome to the show. Tell us about the Global Institute of Church Management, why it was founded, and what type of work it will do.
Well, the Global Institute for Church Management was established yesterday and launched yesterday in order to help to promote the program of church management that we started 3 years ago and had a great success. In these 3 years, there were more than 110 students participating, coming from more than 50 different dioceses and religious institutes, and also lay people.
What did Cardinal Pell happen to say last night in his remarks?
Well, it was great to have Cardinal Pell and to listen to him and to hear his video. But one of the things that struck me is that he started speaking about his experience in jail, how this led him to pray a lot and to be very united to Christ. Secondly, he started to speak also about the need of promoting this culture of a good administration of temporal goods in the church. This is one of the big issues that we are facing in the church. He was saying that I will read his exact words because I think they are very, very important to say. And his words were to say that the church is not a business provides no justification for us to be inefficient, much less corrupt. And he recalled the fact that Saint Teresa of Calcutta used to say that money is more dangerous than sex. We have seen that we had a big sexual abuse scandal in the church in the last decades. We all remember the Dallas Charter and what has meant. But also we know that in the church one big scandal is the financial, how the finances are done and used in the church. The church has to use the temporal goods because it's a need, but for the right aims of the church, at the service of the church, at the service of the poor. We have to set up a church that it's also a church for the poor.
Oh, Father, what do you hope will come from this initiative?
Well, we expect that all around the world there will be people knowing how to administer better the temporal goods of the church. Among our students, we had many priests, religious, also lay people. But I understand that in the future, a lot of lay people will be in charge of the administration of temporal goods in the church. And if they do the job properly, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the following all the principles of the church, and especially the social doctrine of the church, we will be able to become holy also in the administration of temporal goods.
Oh, Father, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We truly appreciate it. Father Luis Navarro, Rector of the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. Thank you again, Father.
Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for your prayers.
Coming up, analysis of China's new national security law for the former British colony. More than 300 people arrested in Hong Kong as the new national security law takes effect.
I think mostly it's a feeling of helplessness.
Thousands took to the streets this morning on the 23rd anniversary of Britain's handover of Hong Kong to China. Police were out in force, firing water cannons, tear gas, and pepper spray at protesters. At least one protester carried a Hong Kong independence flag. The new law makes subversive or secessionist activity punishable by up to life in prison. And in Washington, Hong Kong supporters held a prayer vigil outside of the U.S. Capitol.
We stand in solidarity and call for America and the Trump administration to stand with Hong Kong.
The group of evangelical leaders and human rights activists knelt in front of the Capitol praying for basic rights and freedoms to be restored to the people of Hong Kong. Joining me now on Skype with his analysis is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, Gordon, a lot of people are saying this new security law signals the end of the one country, two systems framework. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's certainly a correct assessment because this national security law allows Beijing to do whatever it wants in Hong Kong. For instance, it sets up an office for safeguarding national security. That office is not subject to Hong Kong law. It's not even subject to mainland law, and it can actually determine its own jurisdiction. So essentially, it's above the law. And when you look at the provisions of this act, it really means that Hong Kong is no longer enforcing its laws.
Yeah, and I know the law's passage instantly raised concerns that it would be used to silence members of the opposition. And while some opposition groups did disband their social media presence, many people were still out protesting today. Do you think there will be continued resistance, or do you think people will essentially just go silent?
I think people may go silent at first. Actually, I was surprised at the number of people who showed up on this July 1. You know, July 1 is a significant date for Hong Kong because it marked the 23rd anniversary of the handover. And ever since 1997, there's been a July 1 march for democracy. This is the first year that the authorities didn't give permission for it. And so therefore, I thought that people would have been intimidated, but obviously they weren't. Now, long term, I don't think we're going to see the 2 million people out on the streets as we did in June of last year. But nonetheless, I think that there is going to be important demonstrations. And Beijing has basically got a long-term struggle on its hands because this is an insurgency. Insurgencies can melt away for times, but they always come back.
Well, Gordon, as you know, anyone found guilty of secession or subversion or terrorism and collusion with foreign powers can now be sentenced to life in prison. Can you give us some examples of some of the so-called crimes?
Well, I'll give you an example right now. So, for instance, I believe the people of Hong Kong should have the right to determine their own future. That statement by itself is a crime under Article 38 of the law because it criminalizes foreign acts outside of Hong Kong. And obviously, the Chinese authorities would feel that that would be succession. So clearly, we're talking about a number of acts, not only in Hong Kong, but elsewhere. This is going to have a chilling effect on what people say and what people do. And unfortunately, this is the way China decided to treat Hong Kong.
Well, the Trump administration placed new restrictions on U.S. exports of defense equipment and certain high-technology products going to Hong Kong. What do you make of the U.S.'s response so far, and do you think that more should be done?
First of all, I think that the steps that the Trump administration has already taken are the right ones. There's more that can be done. So, for instance, there is legislation in Congress that would give the Treasury the right to punish Chinese banks that maintained accounts with officials who were undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. There's a lot the United States can do. And we got to remember that our disagreements with China extend well beyond what it's doing in Hong Kong. So whatever we do on those other issues, I think is going to have an effect. And this is going to be a long-term struggle with China because China is challenging not just the United States, but its neighbors and the rest of the international community.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much for coming on. We always really appreciate your input. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up next, tracking the spread, an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. The governor of Mississippi signs a law to retire the state flag with the Confederate symbol, and the daughter of a civil rights leader witnessed the signing.
Mississippians and the nation understand that symbols matter and that symbols of hurt and hate matter, and it needs to be dismissed and taken down.
Governor Tate Reeves, a Republican, signed the historic bill last night. It takes the 126-year-old state flag out of law, which was approved by Democrat Governor John Marshall Stone back in 1894. A former Marine pilot won yesterday's Democratic primary for the Senate in Kentucky. Amy McGrath overcame a bumpier than expected race. She faces Republican Senator Mitch McConnell in November. McConnell's campaign says that she is a tool for the national Democratic establishment and is out of step with Kentucky voters due to her support for abortion rights and government health care. The occupied protest zone in downtown Seattle that's been in place for 2 weeks is now over.
Right now, SDOT is actually just trying to remove some of the barriers that have been placed so we can open up some of the streets.
The mayor of Seattle ordered police to remove protesters. Police say they arrested 13 people after seeing cars with weapons inside. 2 teenagers were killed earlier this week, and 3 others were seriously wounded in late-night shootings. The autonomous zone was set up last month following the killing of George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis. A man has been arrested for allegedly tearing down a monument of the 10 Commandments on the grounds of a county courthouse in Montana. The 30-year-old suspect faces a felony charge of criminal mischief. Police say they don't know the man's motive for taking down the monument. As the number of coronavirus cases surges in some states across the U.S. tonight, we take a look at where things stand in our continued fight against the pandemic. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Dr. Mark Strand, professor at the North Dakota State University School of Pharmacy and Department of Public Health. Dr. Strand, welcome back to the show. So great to see you.
Thank you.
Well, yesterday we heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci. He was testifying on Capitol Hill, and he said the rate of new coronavirus infections could more than double to 100,000 a day if current outbreaks were not contained. In your opinion, what do you think needs to be done to stem the tide?
Well, it is unfortunate. On April 24th, we peaked out at 40,000 new cases a day, and we saw gradual suppression through May and June. And now we're seeing a return to as much as 47,000 cases a day on the 26th. So this is most unfortunate. It shows that we haven't been able to maintain suppression in certain regions of the country.
I know we've seen some success, that is, with social distancing and, of course, the use of masks. Do you think just those two things can help us balance this need to reopen and also the need to contain the spread of COVID-19?
Well, those are certainly precautionary measures that are helpful. There's no absolute way in which to suppress transmission, but those are the methods that we have at our disposal now without a vaccine. So we need to continue to have high levels of testing. We still have states that have only 6, 7, 8%, Texas, Florida, Arizona, of their persons having been tested. So they don't really even know the true rate of disease in those states. So it's no wonder that as they relax their shelter-in-place orders, they're starting to see those cases rise in numbers again.
Yeah, and it seems that, at least we've been hearing, that it's younger people that are now making up the growing number of new cases. Why do you think that is? And are they experiencing the same type of symptoms and complications as older patients?
Well, the older patients have just taken the precautions more seriously, so the total number of cases has been higher among, younger individuals, younger to middle-aged persons. So by virtue of having a larger number of persons having been infected, then you're also seeing an increase in hospitalizations among those younger patients. There is an observation that younger individuals with a stronger immune system will give a more aggressive immune response, which can then flood immune cells into the lungs, which then causes that respiratory distress. So yes, many young persons think they're perhaps invincible and put themselves into social settings where the risk of transmission is higher and are not aware of the fact that they could still end up with severe disease or even hospitalization.
Yeah, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I want to ask you this last question. Earlier in the show, we reported on encouraging results on the vaccine front. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's a good candidate coming out of England that's already in stage 2 and 3 clinical trials. The hope is that there would be delivery of first doses by October of this year. And so we're hoping that those vaccines prove to be available and can be produced at high levels starting this fall.
Well, Dr. Strand, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights with us. Always appreciated. Dr. Mark Strand, professor in the North Dakota State University School of Pharmacy and Department of Public Health. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
And finally tonight, today is the feast of St. Junipero Serra. His statues were torn down recently in parts of California. The head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops calls St. Serra, quote, the spiritual founder of Los Angeles. Archbishop Jose Gomez of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles says St. Junipero Serra fought the colonial system that exploited Native people, adding the saint spent his entire career defending them and protesting crimes committed against them. Archbishop Gomez goes on to tell the faithful to use St. Junipero Serra's feast day for prayer, fasting, and for charity. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.